to give you an idea of what we will be covering today. Firstly, I'll take you through the mandate of the Technical Expert Group as established by COP10. Secondly, briefly, we will look at the process that was undertaken to develop the draft framework. Next, I'll just give a quick overview of what the draft framework looks like in its current form, and then we'll take a closer look at some of the key sections of the framework. Lastly, there will be just a quick discussion of the major issues that will be before COP11 for consideration. And as Yun said, there will be a question and answer session at the end of, after the presentation. So looking to the mandate of the Technical Expert Group, an omnibus decision was adopted at COP10, decision 10/3 on the Indonesian-Swiss country-led initiative to improve the effectiveness of the Basel Convention. I'm sure everyone's aware of this decision. It was quite an important decision in Cartagena that was taken, identifying 7 action areas, the second of which, Section B, was on developing guidelines for environmentally sound management. Under Section B, a technical expert group was mandated to complete the development of this framework. The decision also defined what the composition of the group. It was decided that 30 experts would be nominated by parties from each of the regional groups of the UN, so 6 experts per regional grouping. The group was also open to observers. We had some good participation from observers and had the option of calling on additional experts. Now, looking at the process to develop the framework, well, the first meeting was last April in Tokyo, Japan. Mainly, the discussions for the first part of the meeting focused on the organization of work. The group had to identify 2 co-chairs from the members of the group, and Mr. Kazuhiko Takemoto of Japan and Mr. Mohammed Kashashne of Jordan were nominated as the co-chairs. There was also a discussion about the schedule of work, and it was generally agreed that more than one meeting was likely to be required and that intersessional work would be necessary. There were discussions about the basic structure of the framework. So what you'll see in a few slides' time was really decided upon in Tokyo, although there have been some changes, minor changes since. Moving on to the second meeting, which took place in Geneva directly after OEWG 8. That is the 8th meeting of the Open-Ended Working Group. This gave the group the opportunity to consider the comments that were received from the OEWG 8 and to really focus in on the specific sections of the framework. A lot of time was spent discussing the introductory sections, which is very important because really those sections set the scope and objective of the framework, and also on the first part of the framework, which is actually defining what ESM encompasses. So very important discussions. There was also discussion around what are the key challenges that countries are facing in the implementation of ESM, and what strategies might be employed to overcome them. And also consideration of the linkage between ESM and transboundary movement, as this was an issue that COP10 requested the group to look into. I should mention that there has been intersessional work between each of the TEG meetings, where quite a bit has been accomplished. Now, the most recent meeting was in Glion, Switzerland, just at the end of January. It was a 3-day meeting. 18 members and 15 observers were in attendance. There was quite a lot of work before this meeting because they had to finalize the draft framework for its submission to COP11 and also to look at what future work might be done to implement the framework going forward. So just a quick look at the organization of work of this meeting. Firstly, the group received presentations on standards, environmental management systems, and certification schemes, as this was seen to be quite key to their discussions, particularly looking at tools that could promote environmentally sound management. There was also an in-depth consideration of the actual text of the framework, which required quite a bit more work. As I mentioned before, the linkage between ESM and transboundary movements, and lastly, what future actions could be taken to implement the framework. And finally, the group considered how the framework and the proposed actions that it developed would be presented to COP11. So I'm just going to give a very quick snapshot of what the draft framework, I should say, looks at right now, noting that, of course, this is subject to COP approval, and this may be, of course, as well subject to COP amendment. Looking at the sections, we have that important introductory section which I mentioned, mainly the scope and objective, which we'll look at briefly in a moment, is one of the key areas there. Then we get into the ESM framework itself, and that's comprised of those three parts, all of which I'll go into more detail shortly. There was quite a bit of discussion about the role of key stakeholders, and there is a very helpful section included in the draft framework on what actions should be taken by each stakeholder group to implement ESM. Next, again, there's a section on the linkages between ESM and TBM. There's a brief section on indicators for the verification of performance of ESM, and the group selected some indicators which it felt would be quite useful in judging whether governments and facilities in particular are successful in implementing ESM. So really to verify performance over time, although it was noted by the group that really this section might require more work. Next, the framework offers up recommendations, which tie in very closely, if we can skip past the annexes, to the draft list of proposed actions. Those are very closely linked. Finally, the annexes, there's further elaboration of the guiding principles that are provided in the introductory section, and there's also a very helpful annex with resource documents. So to move on to a closer look at specific sections of the framework, starting with the scope and objective. Well, in its discussions, the technical expert group realized that although ESM is defined in Article 2 of the Convention, it really is understood and implemented differently by parties. And this is really because the realities that each party faces are different. It also realized that ESM goes just beyond, for example, the waste management facility, that you need other infrastructure around the facility to ensure environmentally sound management, and this includes effective legal systems, government oversight, and other supporting infrastructure. With this in mind, the group identified the scope and objective to be, well, mainly the objective really, to look at what can be done to address the challenges of implementing ESM, firstly. And really in doing so, they wanted to create a practical guide for all stakeholders. So the framework is really, the practicality of it is very important. And in doing so, we would come to the point where we have a framework which, well, firstly and very importantly, establishes a common understanding of what ESM encompasses, identifies tools to support and promote its implementation, and then finally identifies strategies which can be followed to implement ESM. Moving on to the ESM framework itself. So those three objectives that I just mentioned, you will note that they essentially are they're the building blocks of the ESM framework itself. So part one of the framework is to determine, or describe or determine a common understanding of what ESM encompasses. So the group found that in order to ensure the ESM of waste, there needs to be a system of policies, legislation, regulations, monitoring and enforcement, and those other elements there. They need to be in place to ensure environmentally sound management. They went further to identify specific areas that need to be focused upon to ensure ESM. Now, it should be noted that this links to Decision 10.3, the annex of Decision 10.3, where the Conference of the Parties gave a very useful annex for the group to use in considering the development of the framework. So much of this is actually taken from the annex to Decision 10.3. But really, the main items are highlighted there. I don't think I need to go into particular detail on any. I think it's fairly explanatory. But those were determined by the group to be the main elements of ESM that need to be taken into account. Next, the tools to support and promote implementation of ESM. Now, the group had identified many tools, from legislative tools to incentives, training and awareness raising, and these are all listed here. Again, I won't go into detail, but there are examples of each of these tools or these types of tools provided in the framework itself. And there's also a supportive list of resources providing different tools in the annex to the framework. Next, we move on to the third part of the framework, which is to identify strategies to implement ESM. Now, prior to identifying strategies, it was determined by the group that to ensure effective strategy development, that you really need to anticipate, identify, and prioritize issues that you're facing that may be a barrier to achieving the environmentally sound management of waste. So as a first step, the group suggested that baseline information should be compiled on aspects such as types and quantities of waste generated, what sort of infrastructure is available in country to manage the waste, what are the laws already enforced, what enforcement structure is present in the country. So really to establish a baseline from which you're going to move forward to implement your strategies. Moving on to what a strategy should include, well, the group identified 3 core goals which should be considered essential to achieving ESM, and that any strategy should really encompass these 3 core goals. The first of which is to establish a comprehensive legal framework. So you're looking at governing all waste management operations, protecting worker health and safety and the public, the environment, and making sure that you're in accordance with all of your regional and international obligations, particularly with regard to transboundary movement. The next goal, of course, is to ensure that you have effective compliance and enforcement measures or mechanisms and institutions to ensure that. Lastly is the infrastructure itself, to ensure that countries have adequate ESM facility in country. Now, I should say that important discussion during the deliberation on strategies was that we have to bear in mind that the capabilities and challenges faced by, for example, least developed countries, countries with economies in transition, we need to consider that when developing these strategies. Now, just to move on to the linkage between ESM and transboundary movement, there was actually a separate contact group established to discuss this important matter. Really, the key messages that came out of that discussion and out of the meeting as a whole was that Well, of course, transboundary movement may only take place and be considered legal if ESM is insured. And also it was noted that if we implement ESM in accordance with the framework, this should reduce the need for transboundary movement because you're ensuring that countries have adequate capacity for ESM. And secondly, it will lead to a common understanding of what ESM is, so authorities and other stakeholders are better able to determine the legitimacy of a transboundary movement, which is, of course, very important. Now, moving forward to recommendations that were given in the draft framework. Now, these were addressed to Basel parties, other country governments, and waste management facilities. At the party and government level, it was suggested that development and implementation of strategies should be a priority to facilitate and advance ESM, and for parties in particular, they should be reviewing the implementation of these strategies on an ongoing basis, and if problems are identified, to implement corrective actions in response. For waste management facilities, they were encouraged to formalize development and implementation of actions to achieve ESM. Now, as I mentioned, the recommendations and the actions that the technical expert group developed are very closely linked. So I'll go straight on to this list of proposed actions to implement ESM in the short and medium term. Now, I won't go into all of the actions because there's quite a significant list, but really the group broke down actions at the international level, regional, national, and facility level. So at the global level, some of the key actions were, well, we need to look at what tools we have to achieve ESM. Do we need to develop more tools? This is very important. And also, do we need to, we've really in the framework identified the elements of ESM in general, but do we need to really specifically identify what needs to be present at a facility and at the waste stream level? Do we need to go into that level of detail? It suggested that yes, we do. Next, for the regional level, the group stressed the importance of initiating these regional networks for knowledge and information exchange. At the national level, this is really where most of the work needs to be done in developing national legislation, incentives, developing systems for incentives, of course developing the requisite infrastructure, and very importantly ensuring that industry is involved in this process. At the facility level, well, the main thing facilities need to do, of course, is comply with applicable legislation. It's suggested that they implement environmental management systems and look at voluntary certification schemes to have their credentials certified, and things such as monitoring, recording, and reporting were seen as being very important at the facility level. So that really wraps up a look at the framework, at the draft framework document. I'm sure everyone's thinking, well, that's great, but when can we see an actual copy of it? Well, currently the framework is being worked on in terms of editing and formatting, but it's likely that an advanced copy in English will be available at the end of February. So this will be online at the end of February, along with all of the other COP documents. Language versions will follow, we hope, shortly after that. Now, for COP11, there's quite a few issues to consider on this particular section of the CLI decision. First and foremost is the adoption of the framework, whether the COP wishes to further discuss its content remains to be seen. The Secretariat will, of course, accommodate whatever outcome the COP sees fit. Next is the discussion on the draft list of proposed actions, and I think that the technical expert group really did see that this list of actions would be further discussed at COP. So that's quite an important area for discussion. I should mention that there is a CLI document that will shortly be posted online, well, in a few weeks' time. There is a draft decision that deals with several of the elements of the Omnibus CLI decision from COP10. And of course, Section B is one of those. Now, for that reason, we have annexed the draft list of proposed actions to the actual draft decision. So it's currently not part of the framework. Again, the COP will have to decide, well, what's the future role of TEG? Will it be mandated to do further work, or will another group take its place? Is another group necessary? So those are the main issues that we will be discussing come April and May. So I'd like to end here. I'm happy to go into more detail on any area of the presentation. I just thought it might be good to allow extra time for questions. So thank you very much.